I wanted to share with you the program evaluation dissertation framework that we use in NJCU's EDD and Community College Leadership Program. So the program, the Community College Leadership Program here at New Jersey City University, emphasizes scholarly practitioner approach, and also we have a strong emphasis on social justice and equity. Those are part of the core missions of CPED, the Carnegie Project on the Education Doctorate, that we are consortium members of. So rather than using a traditional dissertation approach, we have shifted a bit here at NJCU to use an approach that we think will be more valuable to both the student and also to our community college partners. So doctoral candidates who have passed the qualifying portfolio can move on to the dissertation phase and work with their dissertation committee on developing chapters 1, 2, and 3 so that they can defend their proposal, collect the data, analyze the data, report on the data, and then defend their dissertation. So how does a program evaluation framework differ from the traditional model? Well, traditional PhD programs really look for a gap in the literature. So they're looking for a piece of information that's missing and looking to add to that literature or data, kind of foundational knowledge that exists already in the field. Well, from our point of view, we really want students to begin with looking at the problem of practice. So a problem of practice is an issue that's facing a community college that needs to be addressed. So after it is contextualized, it could be certainly something specific to one's institution, but generally speaking, problems of practice usually are across the board. And impacting students at many community colleges. So that problem of practice is where we ask students to begin their dissertation journey. So they identify a problem that is something they're passionate about and a problem that has an equity, social justice lens, as well as a student success lens. After they dive into the literature, which actually becomes chapter 1 of the dissertation, where they conduct a literature review with 3 different data points. One is the traditional peer-reviewed journal articles that students will access via the library databases. The second is public scholarship. So we also encourage students to look at what's available on the web. Many excellent reports are shared not in peer-reviewed journal articles, but rather publicly through websites such as CCRC, the Community College Research Center, Achieving the Dream, League for Innovations, AACC, American Association of Community Colleges, things of that nature. So we really have a strong emphasis on also including public scholarship. And then the third data point is the practitioner perspective. So we want students to engage in conversations with practitioners in the field so that we're also incorporating that ground level perspective and not just the research piece alone. So basically their first task is to really kind of dive deep into that problem of practice so they fully understand it. After they've kind of engaged in that process, the next step is to identify a potential solution or an intervention. We'll call that our program. It could be a program, a policy, a practice. We have a fairly purposely loose definition of that to accommodate different kinds of interventions that students might be interested in. So for instance, if it's a challenge that's impacting maybe students when they first start college. Intervention might be some kind of onboarding process, an orientation program, might be a first year seminar, could be related to faculty development and ensuring they know how faculty really know how to work with diverse student populations, especially at the beginning, and creating a welcoming, inclusive environment. So it all depends on what the nature of the problem is. The students have been asked to identify themes related to those problems, which are really the root causes. So the intervention or the program that students need to focus their chapter 2 on has to align with one of those root causes. So it has to be a solution aimed to address that problem through at least one of the themes or root causes they identified through their literature review in chapter 1. Once they identify a program, policy, practice, intervention, then they're going to do a deep dive, just like they did with the problem of practice with the literature, to fully understand what is already known about this intervention, what works, what contributes to it working, what doesn't work, what contributes to something not working in this area. So that entails doing another lit review that includes both the peer-reviewed journal articles as well as the public scholarship and also the practitioner perspectives as well. So you're going to tap into all 3 data points once again and package that information together, organizing it by themes, which are, again, predominantly the factors that contribute to the success or lack of success of that intervention, program, or practice. Having all of that background knowledge really prepares students well to engage in their own research, which will be the actual program evaluation. So chapter 1 and 2 kind of set the stage. They're also in unique formats because they're both formatted in a way to be ready for peer review journal publication. So they are in a peer review journal format, following a lit review kind of structure and organizational format for those chapters. Now, the next step is for students to decide whether they're going to do an internal or external evaluation, and whether what kind of evaluation they're going to do. So an internal evaluation happens at your own institution and you would implement it. So let's say a student identified a problem and an intervention that is not happening on their campus. Well, then they can go ahead and implement that intervention, obviously with permission granted by the institution and all the powers that be. But if they get permission to do that, they would go ahead and implement that program on their campus, and they would serve as an internal evaluator of that program. Another option is for students who either A, don't have the sphere of influence to make that change on their own campus, is to serve as an external evaluator. So instead, we can search for a program that exists and provide a service to that institution, to that community college that's using that approach, so that we can serve as an external evaluator. And that way our students get to learn program evaluation skills, which are really essential to being a good leader, but also we're providing a service to the sector, as many community colleges don't have the funding to hire external consultants to evaluate their programs. So in this case, obviously, the nature of the program evaluation would be determined by the key stakeholders on that campus, and the student would need to engage with the institution to determine what their goals of that evaluation would be. Okay, so it's either going to be something that they implement and assess, or assess something that's already that has already been implemented. Now, students have the option of doing they're very different types of program evaluation. So students are asked to create a logic model where they're identifying the resources needed to implement the program. Either they were needed previously to implement something already that's in existence already, or they're identifying resources needed to implement a new program. And then the next step is to identify the activities. And that's kind of the core elements of the program. So what is the program? And that's describing all of those key activities. And then the students showing the relationship between, if I have these resources and I conduct these activities, then I can expect these outputs, short-term and long-term outcomes, and also I can talk to you about what the impact might be. So outputs are basically the evidence that that program actually happened. So you'll be looking for some data points, and those would be assessing implementation. So that would be an implementation type of program evaluation, to really understand, was it implemented in the way it was intended to be implemented with integrity? So that's essential, because if it wasn't, the rest of the logic model doesn't work out and isn't going to make a whole lot of sense. So students may choose to do an implementation only, a program evaluation, or they might do a combination, implementation and formative outcome assessment of the program. And what that means is that would be assessing some of the very immediate outcomes of the program. So immediately upon completing whatever the program was, whether it was a faculty development program, whether it was an orientation program, whether it was a course intervention, whatever, the nature of that intervention is, it would be like either immediately afterwards or very short term afterwards, because we are an accelerated program. So if you are implementing a program, it really needs to stay in that implementation or formative outcome, stage of the program evaluation framework. However, there are opportunities for students to do more longer term outcome evaluations if a program has been in existence for several years and the program has some data that they can get, or either that has already been collected or that would be easy for students to go ahead and gather. So a longer term, evaluation I know is what many students want to investigate because they want to know that outcome, the impact really of the program. And impact really takes 7 to 10 years. So most of our students are probably not going to be doing an impact study unless they're evaluating an extremely well-established program. So again, depending on the nature of it. And an external evaluator may even ask a student to do an implementation evaluation, even if the program has been in existence for a while. And that might be because they want to get a better handle on maybe some of the factors that are working well in terms of implementing it, not just the outcome data. So if they want more of the process piece, then an implementation program evaluation framework would work better. If they want more outcome data, then obviously the outcome evaluation would be a better match. So students get to choose, and some of that is dependent upon the nature of the program that they're going to be evaluating, their stakeholders, whether it's internal or external, and of course the dissertation chair will also have some say about what will work within the time frame of the doctoral program. Now, the reason why we really like this dissertation approach is because we believe that the skills that students are going to walk away with, our graduates are going to engage in this process. So they're going to develop their research skills, but they're doing so in a way where they really get to learn about how to make data-informed decisions about programs. And we will be asking students to not only use a success and equity lens, but also an economic lens. We might have an incredibly powerful program, but it costs $1 million and it serves 5 students. So if that's the case, that's not really sustainable. Instead, we want to try to have as scaled as possible the findings so that we can reach as many students as possible. And of course, colleges have limited funding. So interventions that are free or very cost effective are going to be critical. So this economic lens is an important lens to bring to the table. So chapter 3 of the dissertation will look fairly traditional. It will be a method chapter, but the method will all be focused on the program evaluation method rather than a traditional research method. Once the program evaluation questions have been identified, and that should be, again, created in collaboration with the key stakeholders, those will guide the program design, and that really kind of maps out what kind of program design students will be using. So in many cases, students will probably be using a case study because they may not have access to a comparison group, and it may really just be describing, so it could be descriptive in nature. Either the participant experiences, especially if it's an implementation type of evaluation. So it may be relying a little bit more heavily on qualitative data, but for most of our students, it will use a combination of qualitative and quantitative data. So rather than deciding whether you're doing qualitative or quantitative, we're asking our students to carefully craft those program evaluation questions and then gather the type of data you need to answer those questions. So again, in most cases, it's going to be a mixed method approach or a multiple methods approach where both qualitative and quantitative data is utilized. So the design, again, might be that case study. It also could be quasi-experimental. Perhaps they're able to compare 2 different groups, maybe one group who gets the intervention and another comparison group that does not. Or in some cases, there might even be 2 versions of the intervention. So if the stakeholders are interested in, especially knowing what kinds of conditions work best for implementing and getting the output that you're looking for, they may ask our students to help them look at 2 different types of intervention and see what works best. So all of that kind of depends on what the program evaluation questions are. So chapter 3, again, is that method that looks fairly traditional, just has more of a program evaluation spin. Next, students are asked to, report the findings and discuss those findings. So those are combined into chapter 4. So chapter 4 is results and discussion combined. It should be organized by program evaluation question. So by question, students should be providing the reader with the answer to each question. Whenever possible, that information should be disaggregated so that we're not just looking at success data as a whole, but who it works for whom, under what conditions. The more specific we can get, the better. And then the findings need to be interpreted, obviously, cautiously, because there are most likely very several threats, both to internal validity and external validity. So those threats are key for students to really understand the limitations of their findings, and they need to share that with the reader. However, research findings on a program will have some value too, so that value needs to be highlighted as well in Chapter 4, and all of it should be contextualized within the body of research that already exists around that program slash intervention. So that's what Chapter 4 looks like. Chapter 5 is a little unique, again, straying away from the traditional dissertation model. And what we're asking students to do in Chapter 5 is to focus on recommendations and resources. So we want this to be a very practice-friendly document. So practitioners need to be able to take this document and be able to use it immediately. So what we want our students to do in Chapter 5 is to clearly articulate some recommendations, both for practitioners and also future program evaluators. So some of it is more about implementing practice suggestions, and some of it is about recommendations for future program evaluation in this area. In addition, we want students to also provide some resources that will help practitioners more easily implement or act on those resource recommendations. So the resources might be some documents. So for instance, if it's a mentoring program, some of the resources might be some of the training manual that was used, or some checklists for items for mentors to talk to their mentees about, maybe some do's and don'ts of mentoring, things of that nature. Anything that would be of value to a practitioner, we're going to ask our students to share with the reader. Finally, the last part of the dissertation is the appendix. The appendix document is really important because it will include several very user-friendly documents. So we have a strong emphasis on public scholarship, and we know that the dissertation is a robust but often a long document, and we want to have it broken up, as you can see, into smaller chunks so that pieces of it can be shared with the community along the way. But this last section of the appendix is going to be very user-friendly. So we're looking at students creating, whether it might be an executive summary, it might be an infographic, could be a blog, things of that nature, very brief, short, succinct summaries of, first, the problem of practice, next, what's known about the intervention, also about the key findings related to this particular program evaluation, and of course, at Chapter 5, which is so important, recommendations for practitioners and future program evaluators. So in addition to having everything in that traditional narrative text, we will also have some of those more creative, briefer documents at the end of the dissertation. So hopefully that provides you with a nice overview of what the program evaluation dissertation framework is at New Jersey City University. And of course, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me, Dr. Christine Harrington, at charrington1@njcu.edu, or my colleague, John Melendez at jmelendez at njcu.edu. Thanks so much.